freedom,
family,
world unity,
all these things and more will be discussed on this podcast.
real stories, real people, real debates. On this podcast, we like to express our freedoms and talk about anything and everything goes.
Like freedom, family is important to us, and anybody that is listening, watching, or coming on the show as a guest star are all considered part of the greatest family to ever bless the solar system, the human race. No matter who you are, where you come from, you will always have a voice here on this podcast.
We like to flex our First Amendment, where all speeches and opinions are accepted for the right of freedom of speech. We have a saying we like to live by. Live life with eyes wide open. Being open-minded leads to true understanding of the world as it really is. Please, come, join us, and enjoy this experience as we embark on this journey of truth as we dismantle the subjective truth. I'm your host, Nick.
And I'm your co-host, Victoria.
And you're experiencing high consciousness.
Disclaimer. Any and all information on topics presented are to the best of all who is present in each episode's knowledge. The goal of this podcast is to bring people together and set the example we all wish to see in our everyday lives. Whether it's home life, education, politics, history, business, etc. Any and all subjects can and will be talked and peacefully debated about on this podcast. On debate episodes, there will be a set rules of debate that hosts and guests alike must follow. We ask that you, the audience, like we ask of our guests, in the comments to please try to keep the language as clean as possible. We are a podcast for entertainment as well as educational purposes. Here we are all equal no matter what race, age, or gender. Thank you, and enjoy the show.
Hi, y'all.
Hi there, y'all. And welcome to another episode of High Consciousness.
I'm your host, Nick.
And I'm your co-host, Victoria, and we are
High Consciousness. So, a little recap on today's book that we're reading. We're reading The Secret Destiny of America. For those of us who are new and don't know, we've been reading this book for the past, month now?
About 2 months.
About 2 months now?
Yeah.
And we have learned a lot of gritty details about our past history. Because what this book is a, I guess you could say, a glossary of past historical figures that have implemented our society that we use today, in a sense. I mean, if you really want to look at it. And our last chapter was about a man who made our American flag. Now, it's in the book they call him the professor, like he dined with Benjamin Franklin, George Washington, and the story goes that he was the one that made sure that the flag was able to be modified in the future, because he had a feeling that we will gain more states or more land in the near future. Now, some of us, well, I would think most of us would remember that we were taught in high school, middle school, or elementary school that a woman made the flag. But I feel like that I feel like that the story goes that she was the one that sewed the flag, and he's the one that modified the flag, or like designed the flag.
Yeah, he designed it, and a woman
knitted
it. They made it. They sewed it together.
But I feel like that's where we're getting our two histories mixed up from. That's the same history, just two different timelines of the history.
Or two different sides of the story. At least.
Of course. So, that's pretty much what this book is about. We have gone from learning about the historic figure of Akhenaten, Mr. Solon, Plato, Francis Bacon. Plutarch, oh yes, and Plutarch. We have also dibble-dabbled in the American Prophecy with Hope's Prophecy with America. Sir William Hope, who has predicted America from 1732 to 1901. Amazingly enough, credibly enough.
We've touched base on the Mayas and Quetzalcoatl.
And how they were advanced civilization that knew of the world and and of the stars, and it had a very advanced language that legitimately interpreted thought and emotion into their language. Really more complex than Chinese language. And we also touched upon who else did we touch upon? There's another figure that I'm trying to think of. Oh, the Utopians with Franklin, with Moore, and Campanella.
With Mr. Campanella, Thomas More,
Mm-hmm.
and there was one more. I forget which one it is. Well, pick up the book.
I believe.
Let's go reference real quick.
I believe that was chapter... Oh my God, Design of Utopias.
Chapter 10. Okay, so we see Thomas More.
Bonici.
Boccolini.
Boccolini. Mm-hmm.
That's right.
And
Campanella, Boccolini,
and Thomas More.
And Thomas More.
All three of them had different ideas of a utopia. And each time they made a design of a utopia, it was always to basically crap on the hierarchy that was already in session, saying
like the kingship or the dictatorship at that time that was in power. It was kind of like a poke funny at them, but also trying to have like a serious undertone of how some kind of reform needed to happen where there was more power to the people rather than the kingships at the time.
Mm-hmm. And we also dabble in the secret societies and how secret society has been around for more than 4,000 years type deal. Like since the time of Greece, but then when Christianity came on board, they started pushing the philosophers out further and further.
And then that's when those same philosophers had to apparently take up the cloak of, some kind of Christian phraseology and supposedly, according to the book, which again was written in 1944, I'm sure there's more information now. We are not saying this is the book. Those philosophers, those pagan philosophers, took up the Christian cloak of what we call today as Islam.
Now I'm going to try to find this quote so that way we're not...
See, it's not us. We're not trying to do anything here. We're just saying this is the information that we had gotten from this book, which again was written in 1944. So this is old information that we are just presenting to you today.
Mm-hmm. I don't think this is just chapter. I think it was in the last chapter.
It was...
Not the Prophecy of Notre Dame.
The preservation... No... I know it was the chapter that I read.
Well, that's chapter 7, so this would be the chapter you read.
Chapter 7. Isn't that the one where we had our guests, Ford and Beeps? Yeah, that was a really good episode. Lots of really great commentary there. And we get a little off track about food, so don't watch that episode if you're hungry. Go eat something first. Yeah, see, part of the Dionysian movement migrated eastward to build the Empire of Islam, which the stone in mosque and palace bearing the mark of the Master Masons. And before that, it says, the paragraph before that, it says, the rise of the Christian nation broke up the intellectual pattern of the classical pagan world. By persecution of this pattern's ideologies, it drove the secret societies into greater secrecy. The pagan intellectuals then reclothed their original ideas in a garment of Christian phraseology, but bestowed the keys of the symbolism only upon those duly initiated and bound to secrecy by their vows. And then that next part where it says, I'll read again, part of the Dionysian movement migrated eastward to build the Empire of Islam, which with each stone in mosque and palace bearing the mark of the Master Masons. Later, the migration continued as far as India, where these same marks are to be seen on the monuments of the Mughal dynasty. So, that's
what the book
says, not us. Okay?
Period. Just want to make that very clear. That's what the book says.
That's what the book said. And again, this is 1944, written by a Freemason, mainly P. Hall.
And it's very renowned, and actually everyone loves during this time. Like, he actually has the research to back it up on. But, once again, that's not us. This is his words.
Yeah, those are his words, not ours.
In today's chapter, we're going to learn about a historical figure of Thomas Paine and the rights of men. The crusading of Tom Paine definitely advanced for America's that secret destiny by which all people shall be free and equal. There is little doubt that he assisted Jefferson in writing the Declaration of Independence. Paine emphasized the necessity of separating the spheres of church and state and government. preached religious tolerance in a day when the spirit of prosecution was still strong, attacked the spiritual privilege of the atrocities. Only by thousands of years of conditioning can mankind be brought to the perfectionist state envisioned by this American patriot. So that's the little prologue of the chapter, giving us a little hint of what this chapter is going to in store about this Thomas Paine character. He apparently assisted Thomas. I think we all heard of Thomas Paine, honestly, in school. There's ain't a name that is not unfamiliar to us.
Is it bad that I can't really remember?
I remember Thomas Paine. I do. I remember us talking about Thomas Paine. He was.
That might have been part of history class where I might have been snoozing.
Maybe, but anyway.
We've all done it. Don't judge me. We've all snoozed during history class.
Oh yes. Now, the stormy petrel of revolutionary days in America and France was Thomas Paine, son of a hard-working Quaker who made his living cutting barrel staves. Young Thomas' formal education ended in grammar school. He practiced his father's trade for a time before turning his mind to politics and the social problems of his time. Benjamin Franklin inspired Thomas Paine to become a champion of human rights. The first meeting took place in England, and at Franklin's suggestion, Paine came to America and entered into the publishing business. English-born, he became an outstanding champion in the cause of freedom for the colonies. His writings so fanned the flame of patriotism that it had been said of him that he did more to win the independence of the colonies with his pen than George Washington accomplished with his sword. So Thomas Paine had a I guess you could say a very humble beginning. His father was a Quaker dealing with barrels, and he dibble-dabble in his father's trade until he went on to a grammar school, pursued grammar and literature. And that's when he met Ben Franklin, and Ben Franklin was actually the one to convince him to go to America and be an advocate for human rights and freedoms. And apparently he has done more right and gained more independence with the colonies with his pen than George Washington's sword.
Which I guess is where that phrase, the pen is mightier than the sword, might have come from in the first place.
Well, it makes sense because philosophically, people are going to understand words in the art of violence. It's common sense reasoning.
To an intelligent and enlightened nation of peoples, words have a little more power rather than violence. Because
they understand the power, they understand the reasoning of what they're fighting for with those words. Okay, continuing on. There's little doubt that Thomas Paine assisted Jefferson in writing the Declaration of Independence. Present research even points to the possibility that he composed the entire document, then submitted it to Jefferson for editing and revision. The reference in the Declaration of Independence to the law of nature and nature's God especially reflects Paine's theological convictions. So Paine might have been the one to actually written the whole entire document of the Declaration of Independence and then gave it to Jefferson to edit it and revision.
Bruh.
So basically, Thomas Jefferson just basically edited and added in a few more things that Paine might have missed out on, but the whole thing is still there.
That is super, super cool. That's kind of wild, in my opinion.
To say, yeah.
Nuts.
Paine held several offices in the Continental government during the period of the Revolutionary War, and in 1789 returned to Europe. 3 years later, he published his Rights of Man. Although the truth contained in the essay were never successfully controverted.
Controverted? Let me see. Yeah.
Controverted? I want to say converted.
Although the truths contained in the essay were
never successfully controverted. The book caused repercussions that forced him to leave England and to escape trial for treason. He sought refuge in France. Almost immediately, he became involved in the French Revolution as a staunch supporter of the Revolutionary Party. He boldly advocated the perpetual banishment of Louis XVI, but was opposed to the execution of the king. His tolerant views of this subject must have been alienated the terrorists, for Robespierre caused him to be imprisoned under sentence of death by the guillotine. It was just before this imprisonment that he published the first part of his immortal book, The Age of Reason. He wrote the second part during the 10 months of his incarceration. So Paine was in our constitutional government during the Revolutionary War, and then left in 1789 and published a book called The Rights of Men. And I think The Rights of Men, once again, was poking at the atrocity and the
aristocracy.
The aristocracy and the bureaucrats of the royal family, and the royal family didn't like that, and was about to put his ass in jail for treason. So he left house, or as the old saying goes, what was the old saying goes? He booted and scooted out.
Oh yeah, he booted and scooted. He scooted and booted.
He scooted and booted out of London, out of England, to go to France. And just for him to go to France to be part of a revolutionary, be another revolutionary activist for freedom.
In France during the French Revolution.
Mm-hmm. But was opposed the execution of the king. He opposed the execution. And then in turn, he was the one that got imprisoned by the same revolutionary party that he was in, from my understanding.
Let's read that one more time.
His tolerant views on this subject must have alienated the terrorists, for
Robespierre
caused him to be imprisoned under sentence of death by the guillotine. Because
he boldly advocated for the perpetual banishment, but was opposed to the execution. Okay.
He was fine with
He was fine with banishing Louis, but he wasn't fine with killing him.
Exactly, and that's what made everyone was like, "You're not fine with killing him, so you must be a part of his allegiance. Then you don't want him to die."
So he went from being a revolutionary to a traitor.
Just like that.
Just like that.
Wow. Well, you also got to realize the French Revolution was probably one of the most bloodiest revolutions. They used the guillotine left and right for everybody. Everybody got the guillotine. That was that's a history that we all know.
Yeah.
And he also wrote a book, The Age of Reason, the first part of the book, and then he wrote the second part during his incarcerations, in his 10-month incarceration.
While he was waiting to be killed.
So,
dude, imagine sitting there in a prison cell for 10 months. And, like, you're just sitting there waiting to die. Like, oh, bro, that is such torture. Oh, God.
Paine's escape from death in France was by one of those unforeseen circumstances which so often have changed the course of history. Robespierre fell from power. His successors restored Paine to his seat in the Revolutionary Convention. So, the dude that was running the Revolutionary Army lost power
after throwing Buddy in jail. After throwing Thomas Paine in jail.
And his successors restored Paine's position into his seat of the Revolutionary Convention, so he had his seat back in his say-so and his representation.
In his life.
No, right.
He regained his chance at life.
When things in France had settled down to the sober process of setting up a permanent government, Paine turned his attention to George Washington, whom he bitterly attacked, thus losing much of his popularity in America.
Wait, he wrote our Declaration of Independence, but he was against Washington?
Yeah, so this sounds like to me your typical guy that hates authority, all in general. That's what I'm getting at. Bros as opposed to authority, all in general. Because...
But why was he opposed to Washington, though? Does it...
Yeah, it doesn't really make it really stand out clear. I guess because of...
Or that might have to be a research point.
Yeah, it has to be a research point, but I think it's because of the church or something like that. Here's what it says. Paine returned to the United States in 1802, and his closing years were comparatively uneventful. He died in 1809. 10 years later, his body was sent back to England to be reinterred in his native earth. Thomas Paine was a free thinker, a radical pamphleteer. My damn speech impediment me.
Let me see.
It's a pamphleter.
Radical pamphleter. Yep.
Yeah, it's just my speech impediment, but it's not letting me say that word properly. It was his misfortune to be born out of time, yet by his very birth and the energy of his nature, he helped to change the face of time. He attacked the corruption of the British government, and such honesty and skill that he was the most feared man in England. Then, with the simple conviction of a Quaker's deist, he threw the power of his written word against the religious corruption that burdened the peoples of Europe and interfered with the social progress of mankind. So now we're doing he doesn't really say why he attacked George Washington.
Then, with the simple conviction of a Quaker deist, he threw the power of his written word against religious corruption. So, yeah, that doesn't really give us any...
Well, reason why he attacked George Washington, I guess...
Like, it just gives us that one brief...
I guess because George Washington became president, and I guess Paine was like, what are you doing coming into one power on all these people after we done try to get away from that one-headed system? That's just an assumption. That would make sense. That's why
I can see that. We're going to have to do a little more research, but that little insight does kind of like, if that really is the case, then their thought process sounds right about right.
That's about the only thing. That's about
the thinking was at the time.
That's the only thing that can honestly make sense to me as to why Thomas Paine would attack George Washington is because they made George Washington inadvertently king. But I think Thomas Paine was attacking him because he saw the evils of people loving one man and giving one man all the power. But I feel like Thomas. But yeah, Thomas.
But then
he's the one that he ran the Declaration of Independence, but he wasn't the one that.
Well, the Declaration of Independence
is not the Constitution.
Isn't our Constitution?
Exactly.
No.
So
the Constitution is the one that gives the presidential powers and electoral rights and legislation and stuff like that. The Declaration of Independence was just us saying, England, we're giving you the good old-fashioned America, boot up your butt and get out of here.
Right, so I feel as though that comes into play with the fact that Thomas Paine didn't know fully how our legislature worked. I mean, I possibly could be very well be wrong on that, but due to the simple fact that he did not write the Constitution, but he did write the Declaration of Independence. It says
which might be, him writing the Declaration of Independence where, the very first words of it, we the people, by the people, for the people.
Mm-hmm. So
that's where I think, if Washington had come to a presidential stance or, placement before Thomas died, then I can see where, I guess, again, he would be against it because it's like, yo, bro, you just led an entire army against the kingship just to pretty much make yourself king. When I wrote the entire document that eradicated what we fought for.
But I can also see the kind of argument why he became unpopular with America was that you weren't there to help write the Constitution, so you have no room to really talk crap about how we did this. You helped us write the Declaration of Independence, but did you help write anything else furthermore? Because you left in 1789.
Well, let's see. A little research point real quick.
Because it does say he left America in 1789.
My internet's running slow today. So when was the Constitution written? There we go.
1787. So.
Well, okay, but when was it totally
completed?
It took effect in 1789. So 2 years later.
After he
so it was
when he left, because remember it says it right here. Paine had several offices in the conventional, held several offices in the constitutional government during the continental government during the period of the Revolutionary War, and in 1789 returned to Europe 3 years later. He published his Rights of Men. So I guess the next thing we should write. Did Thomas Paine help write the Constitution? Here it is right there, that first one.
It seems like our answer is probably going to be no.
He written Common Sense. Yes, that's true.
Yeah.
That's true. That's where I heard Thomas Paine from, because he wrote that book.
Even after the armed hostility, British forces 72. Okay. Okay, so his book Common Sense is the book that came out before or during the Revolutionary War, and is what really got the early Americans fired up about independence. Okay.
Paine's influence proceeded, and some of his ideas found their way into the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights. So his ideas and his influence did go onto the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights, but he did not write it down. And this is
so his ideas made it in there, but when he saw what his ideas turned into, I guess that's where he criticized our founding fathers or criticized Washington so much.
It's one of those kind of things that our history gets shrouded on, I guess you could say, that we really don't know, really.
Having a king was a bad idea. He didn't. Okay, so maybe. Okay, so here's key points made in Thomas Paine's Common Sense.
Government's purpose.
Here's his key points. Government's purpose was to serve the people. Paine described a government was a necessary evil which existed to give a people structure so they could work together, solve problems, and prosper. But to do that, it would have to be responsive to the people's needs. The British system, Paine argued, failed at that and gave the monarchy and nobles in Parliament too much power to thwart the people's elected representatives. The Constitution in England is so exceedingly complex that the nation may suffer for years together without being able to discover in which part the fault lies. Some will say in one and some in the other. And the political physician will advise a different medicine.
In every political position.
Damn. Okay. So
having a king that was a bad idea. Paine didn't find fault with British rule of the colonies. He ridiculed the very idea of having a
hereditary monarch at all.
In England, a king hates little more to do more than to make war and give away places, which in plain terms is to impoverish the nation and set it together by the ears. Paine wrote, a pretty business indeed for a man to be allowed 8,000 sterling a year for and worship into the bargain. From one more is one honest man to society in the sight of God, and then all the crown we met
ruffians
that ever lived.
And then America as the home of the free. Paine refuted the notion that Americans should be loyal to a mother country that he considered a bad parent. Even brutes do not devour their young, nor savages make war upon their families, he wrote. Besides, he argued, America's real connection was to people everywhere who yearned to escape oppression. The New World hath been the asylum
for the
prosecuted lovers of civil and righteous liberty from every part of Europe.
And religious liberty.
And, every civil and religious liberty from every part of Europe. Paine proclaimed, hither they have fled, not from the tender embraces of the mother, but from the cruelty of the monster, and is so far true of England, and the same tyranny which drove the first immigrants from home pursues their descendants still. Wow. Okay.
So basically, we can definitely see.
Oh, read that next part.
America had a rare opportunity to create a new nation based on self-rule. As Paine saw, both Americans and the British knew it was inevitable that the colonies would break free. I have never met with a man either in England or America who has not confessed his opinion that a separation between the countries would make place one time or another. And that time had come. America had raw materials from timber and hemp to iron and the skills that it needed to build and equip an army and navy for its defense. Just as important, the individual colonists had the potential to put aside differences and form a powerful nation, but they needed to do it quickly, before the population grew to a point where new divisions might develop. The moment in history was that particular time, which never happens to a nation but once, he wrote.
A strong central government was needed. Paine envisioned that the new nation would have a strong central government with a constitution that protected individual rights, including freedom of religion. A firm bargain and a right reckoning made long friends, he argued. So, that's pretty much... So, right there, America had a rare opportunity as a nation of self-rule, and so I guess when Washington claimed presidency, that's where Paine probably it was very bitter about
I
it.
critiqued on it.
Yeah, that's why he was critiquing on that. So, moving along.
In the age of reason, Paine emphasized the necessity of separating the spheres of church and state, looking at both institutions in their practical state of corruption rather than in their ideal state of mutual integrity. He held a broad view of religion in general, believing that all faiths were naturally good and were necessary to the spiritual security of humanity. Such broadness was out of season, and it made him numerous enemies among those holding fanatical convictions. It was dangerous to preach religious tolerance in this day, when the spirit of persecution was still strong. When the clergy involved itself in the political conspiracies of the state and descended to the level of self-interest, their spiritual power was pursued, and, said Paine, they lost all claim upon public respect. Paine saw the conniving, plotting, and counterplotting of religious leaders who had cast their lot with the aristocracies against long-suffering and exploited citizens. With a church such as this, he had no patience, and he had the eloquence and abundance courage to express his convictions regardless of the cost. So Paine did not care. If he saw corruption in the government or in religion, he was going to call it out and legitimately point out of all the corruptions in it.
So he was like one of the realest of the real before we knew what, real was.
And he didn't care about the consequences. He didn't care. He had no patience for churches that went against their own narrative and just preached their own way of how they saw religion and not how it was supposed to be interpreted as. If I had to understand as to why Paine went the way he went.
Yeah. Now that we read, a bit of one of his key points from
Common Sense.
From Common Sense, now we, have a better picture of what his state of mind was, which, you're thinking at the time, when we said, it was probably the fact that, we fought against a kingship type kind of thing, and now here you are turning around and making this a kingship type kind of thing, without making it an entire kingship.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, with that Common Sense excerpt where it's like, America had its chance to do this, but we did this instead.
He held the aristocracies in general and equal antithetic privileged classes to him.
Let me see.
Equal
antipathy.
Equal antipathy privileged classes to him were little better than parasites, living off the toil of honest men and total indifference to the public good. A government compounded from a dissolute nobility and fawning professional office holders never catered to the longer purse, brought Paine's righteous indignation to the boiling point, indignation which he could apply in words understandable to the masses. It was his simple reasoning that such a church plus such a state equaled chaos. It was bad enough for government to burden the people with extravagance, but it was still worse for the church to preach that men should accept this load as coming from God, to see it designed to purify their souls by the practice of patience and humility.
Well, you started getting a little passionate there for a second. You were like, what? Wait, do what now? It was bad enough for government to burden the people with extravagances, but it still was worse for the church to preach that men should accept this load as a coming from God.
Yeah, that's basically saying.
So it was bad enough.
This is what Paine was talking about. He was like, okay, the government is going to make it worse for the people and taxing on them and everything else. And here is the church saying, yeah, this is part of God's will. You know what I'm saying? This is part of God's will. You got to pay for these taxes. This is the coming of God.
You got to pay your tithes.
Yeah, and that's when Pam was like, "Are you really serious right now? Like, you can't be serious with this crap." I'm sorry for my language. I know I let it slip out, but I'm on Thomas Paine right there. Like, you going to double sign me right now? You going to damn?
The government's gonna tax the crap out of me, and then the church is gonna back it up, saying that these taxes are God's will. Like, what?
Yep.
Are you kidding me?
And be patient with humility.
That's kind of like the World Economic Forum these days, saying you will have nothing and be happy.
And while you're eating it.
Supposedly. That's just what I've heard from the grapevine, and honestly, when I watched Klaus Schwab say that,
and we'll have fried crickets too. We'll eat insects too.
Talking about the fried crickets and the proteins in them and stuff, all that. Yeah, that World Economic Forum.
They said it, not us. They said it, not us. Not us.
We just watched the convention. We're just repeating what the hell they said.
But, you know, I guess the system wants us just to be shut up and be quiet about it and not talk about it.
I mean, we are still being shadow banned on YouTube. We're being highly censored on Facebook. I keep getting restrictions all the time, whether it's on my personal page or it's on High Consciousness on our pages, and still can't look us up on Google.
But everyone still has to be their own Thomas Paine and their own founding fathers in their own way when it comes to this. And I really don't. And I feel like that's what the big corporations are kind of not thinking about. Is like, you're doing this, but not simply
but you're not realizing
you're making modern founding fathers, and I don't think you realize like this wave is going to be a lot worse than the Revolutionary War wave. But going.
Yeah, because we have technology these days. Like, nothing. I mean, yeah, you fight war with people these days, but we are fighting war more so with
information.
Information these days. So, like, it's an information war.
And an information and a moral war. Whose morals is higher than whose type deal. Which is messed up, but we're at that point.
When we start making war because we don't have the same virtues or whatever it is, you know, we don't have the same moral codes and stuff like that. Like, to make war over that is not great.
No,
like whatever happened to just
talking
stuff
and
out.
It doesn't help. And it doesn't help that the year is 2024, the year of our election year. So now everything that we say will get heavily censored and emphasized on us being misinformation.
Even though we're not really talking politics at all, we're just, you know, talking about straight off the cuff, just normal, everyday, average Joe type kind of deal.
Well, this isn't average type Joe's because people probably have a lot forgotten this information. They probably heard of Thomas Paine, but don't really realize how burdened and heavy his common sense books were.
Yeah, like me. When I said at the very beginning, I was like, is it bad that, like, I kind of don't remember anything about Thomas Paine? Like, the name sounds familiar, but I don't really remember.
He wrote Common Sense.
And you had a better history teacher than I did.
I had the same history. I had Coach Garner and Mr. Dresser.
I had Mr. Dresser, not Garner.
Coach Garner was at Eastern.
I know. Garner was at Eastern and Stokes was at Eastern.
And Miss Reese went over. No, she didn't. Yeah, Mr. Dresser went over there with Thomas Paine. And
dude, 8th grade with Mr. Dresser. That was a long time ago. Like, the best memory I have of him is that one time he threw the expo marker at Michael Turner because he started snoring in the middle of class.
Yeah, well, you know, I guess with me, a lot of key history stuff with me. It's things I guess my brain deemed important.
I guess my brain at the time just didn't deem it as important as ancient history. More ancient than America. I think at the time I was not very interested in American history. I was more interested in world history, if anything.
Okay, so it was not enough for Paine to believe that all men were created free and equal. these free men had the inalienable
You poor thing, what's your speech
I know, it's terrible. The right of representative government and the further right to improve themselves to the enjoyment of all natural good. He was more of a perfectionist than was practical in his own day or even in our time. Like most idealists, he failed to accept the weakness in that very human nature which he sought so desperately to champion. Only thousands of years of conditioning and the complete reorganization of government, religion, and education could bring mankind to the estate which Paine envisioned. He called men to a high destiny, and men understood in part and applied it in part, but lacked the capacity for a full and understanding acceptance.
Oh, yes, that is capacity.
This probably explains Paine's bitter attack. Oh, okay. Now we're going to get into why Paine attacked George Washington. Because he was a perfectionist, and he felt to accept the fact that, and no one's going to full take into his ideals. They only take part in his ideals. This probably explains Paine's bitter attack on George Washington. Paine had been present when the American government was formed, and he must have been at least a witness to the beckonings which went on during those most crucial years. As a president, Washington was not
beckonings, bickering.
Of the bickerings which went on during those crucial years. As a president, Washington was not universally popular. It was also after considerable engineering that his election had been accomplished. Almost immediately, the new government fell into political difficulty. Self-seeking politicians appeared on the scene at the very beginning, just as they had never since been absent from the picture. Paine, seeing some of the noblest ideals of the new state perverted and misinterpreted, dared to speak when discretion held the tongues of other men. In Paine's own public career, made up largely of reversals, he chose to accept all forms of personal humiliation rather than modify any of his attitudes. He never accepted that such a policy as he advocated would be impractical in a permanent form of government. Political experience leads the wisest of public men to the realization that the possibilities of public office are limited, and that good things must be brought about slowly and opportunely if they are to survive public interior and opposition. But in principle, Paine was right, and he has left an imperishable landmark. He was a utopian, a dreamer, and with a mighty courage of conviction. And when the dream of world democracy is finally realized, Paine's name and memory will be immortalized, for he was outstanding among the great pioneers of human progress. Thomas Paine's crusading was part of that secret destiny, which was ordained that all people shall be equal and free. Many times his career appeared to have been ended by the accidents of ill fortune, but always he was preserved against his enemies and even against himself. He was one of the golden links in that golden chain which binds the earth to the pinnacle of high Olympus.
Ooh, high Olympus? To compare it to Olympus, that's pretty big. And again, kind of like chiming back to our previous chapter with, chapter 7, the Greek Dionysians, because they were the followers or the priests of Dionysius, who is the wine god,
Mm-hmm.
the dude that turns
wine god of entertainment.
Yeah, the god of wine and entertainment or something like that. So, next chapter is chapter 17, The Unknown Who Swayed the Signers of the Declaration of Independence. So, we'll be getting a little deeper into the Declaration of Independence.
We're learning more and more of these secret characters that have helped us made America. But I'm so interested in the Thomas Paine incident with George Washington, so I guess there were characters that were within our founding fathers that didn't really speak up for our independence, or didn't really throw in their 2 cents, and then when we actually did overthrow the government, for some odd darn reason, they thought it was a good idea for them to pipe up and say they should be the ones in leadership. And Paine said, no. You didn't put in the work. Who the heck is you? Type deal.
What if those are the part of, like, maybe possibly the Dark Brotherhood that Thoth talks about in the Emerald Tablets that he warns us about?
And then that'll be
dun dun dun.
Well, then that'll be a rare case in history where the Brothers of Light, where the Children of Light and the Brothers of Darkness fight together to banish one evil. Then, for that to happen.
Well.
And then it comes into question: did they work hand in hand together to try to bring this unity and equality to above, just for the Brothers of Darkness to succeed over?
I don't know, but I have a feeling along the way, somewhere, we're going to be able to answer our own question. But right now, we're just, as none the wiser as everybody else, and we're all on this journey together. So, like and follow and subscribe to our channel if you have made it this far in the video. And always give us a like and a subscribe. Please share our content. Get us rolling in the algorithm.
And
like
leave a comment. And please leave comments so we know what questions you have. Because I know you got questions.
We all know you have questions. Come on, y'all. Give them to us. We want them.
But remember to live life
with eyes wide open. Thank y'all, and we'll see y'all in the next one.